You all ready to join me today in our trip to outer space?
Yeah.
Albert Shivers.
The Matrix doesn't happen.
That's very true.
Come along quietly or not.
Night,
Goodbye, Willis.
as I about the time to bright.
From Albert
The
Shivers.
mysteries of the fading light.
They don't have to like it.
They're trying to put a caravan.
The general concept is that creativity flourishes in an atmosphere of freedom.
Hello, folks, and welcome to another episode of the Planet Shivers Podcast. I am Albert Shivers, and I may not be the most downloaded, but I've downloaded the most. I'm very excited for this episode today. We have a bunch of people on the show today for a Roundtable, which is my favorite type of podcast. You will join me as I sit around the kitchen table with a bunch of returning guests to talk about local history and specifically Native American history. I'm joined by Sean, artist extraordinaire Don Wilson, who's been on the show a bunch. He is our most recurring guest and deserves every episode he's been on, and I'm excited to have him on again. We're also, Tom Dente is back on, the leader of the band Powwow, and another member of the band Powwow, and my good buddy and right hand on this podcast through all 99 episodes. Isaac Wilson is back, as well as some very special lady guests, Mary, Emily, and Kim, who I'm a little partial to. They jump on the show, and together we just have a fun time talking and conversing, and I'm going to say it again, I really enjoy the Roundtable episodes. You know, I grew up around a big kitchen table, big family events with everybody talking, and I like when I have these episodes that bring me back to that feeling, give me that nostalgic vibe of just a bunch of people off the rip talking about things. I throw a topic in the middle of the table and everybody chews on it. Before we get to the episode, I just I had something happen to me this morning I wanted to talk to you about, get your opinion on. Got a call this morning. My friend Kim Jong hit me up and asked me if I can come over later and help him nuke the Chinese. And I don't know what to make of it. I just hope he was talking about putting the leftovers in the microwave. I'm really not sure what he meant. It's May. It's early May. May 11th is when I'm recording this. Mother's Day is right around the corner. It's coming up this Sunday, which means for me it's time to go in the closet and dust off the old Ouija board and take that for a spin this Sunday. So enjoy it. Enjoy the holiday. I just want to remind you guys you could find out more of what I'm up to on Instagram at Albert Shivers, and of course www.albertshivers.com. This coming weekend, Powwow will be playing Froggy Days Festival in Narrowsburg, New York. There's a bunch of other bands that are gonna play. I recommend going to see Powwow, but you may also find other bands you like. It's going on all this weekend. But I'm telling you, go Saturday, see Powwow, see the other bands. There's a bunch of vendors, a lot of cool stuff going on. That is this weekend. Go check that out for the sake of Powwow. And last but not least, the secret word for this episode is Connecticut. Like the state, Connecticut. Throughout the conversation, if you hear the word Connecticut, timestamp it in the comments below. First correct timestamp gets a shout out in the next episode. And like I said last time, if this starts to catch on, I'm hoping to hand out some prizes to the first correct timestamp. Anyway, enjoy this episode with Sean, Don, Tom, Isaac, Mary, Emily, and Kim, uncut and unabridged after these messages.
This country's taken some hits lately. But when we get hit and are down, we don't stay down. We get up and we hit back with our fists or our nunchucks. And then, when we're done hitting and we're tired, because nunchucking can wear a guy out, we sit down on a couch An American couch. A Couchtown couch.
You are listening to the first station on your dot. WCNW, operating on a frequency of 1,500 kilocycles in Brooklyn, New York.
So we're here, another episode of the Planet Shivers Podcast, and everybody is here. This is going to be a local history episode, and I have some of the best local historians, so I'm excited that we're all here around the table. And we're going to start with Sean, and he's going to talk about the Doane Brothers. And you could just, I guess they were from around here?
They were from Bucks County, and they were Quakers, and they were highwaymen during the Revolutionary War. And if anyone remembers anything as I'm going, just chime in with it, because I'm having a mentally challenged today. But as I recall, it was 5 brothers and a cousin, but they had other people that ran with them, and I think at their largest they might have been 13 or 15 people. And they were, a lot of people say they were Tories, but from the older stuff that I read, they were more opportunists, and everyone says they, stole horses from the colonists and sold them to the British, but you don't hear in the, later stories written in this century that then they'd steal them back from the British and sell them to the, Americans, and that went on back and forth, and they'd, rob anyone they could, Whigs and stuff, and I guess they got upset. It was in the 1870s. Supposedly, one of the American Whig tax collectors went after the family farm. 1770s. Yeah, did I say 18? Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay, 1770s. Yeah, early 1770s. Thanks. Yeah, what did he do? Yeah, it caused him quite a bit of trouble, and they started, robbing people, and they were pretty successful with it. And there's supposed to be a couple $1 million worth of colonial money stashed multiple places, but a lot of it supposedly is up and down the Delaware, from Point Pleasant, Pennsylvania, where it runs into, there's that big creek or river that runs into the Delaware there. And then further up, Robsville area, there's the cave just north of you. And then there's another cave north of Easton. And then there's, in Berks County, there's supposed to be stash places, which is kind of fun. And what else?
And a lot of the places aren't, it's not lawful to access them, right?
Probably nowhere, I would guess, because it's all either private property or state property, and I'm sure,
How do you spell the name of these places?
It's on the tombstones, a lot of them, it's just D-O-A-N, but in the books later on you see D-O-A-N-E, so... But Doane.
However, whoever spelled it, but Doane, D-O-N.
But I'm trying to remember the head guy's name, and I'm going blank. But the leader of the group, he was the guy that delivered on the night of Washington crossing the Delaware. He crossed somewhere much further north, like probably Easton area. Right around there, he crossed and rode his horse all the way through. It's middle of winter, while Washington's bringing all his stuff over. The colonial guys went all the way up to Belvedere and grabbed every Durham boat.
And there was all kind of hustling going on with the boats, from what I've read and understood. Right.
And they dragged all the Durham boats down to Washington's crossing.
Yeah.
So he got wind of it, and
buying all these boats.
There's stories that he jumped in the river with his horse and went across that way, but however he got across, took a boat, whatever he did, I don't know, grabbed another horse on the other side, rode from up in the Easton area all the way down to Trenton in the middle of the night, and it's not like there's big highways or anything there, you just had to know the trails and stuff, and got down there to the Hessian General at the barracks at 4 or 5 in the morning. And they had been partying all night, and he's like, "Fuck that!"
I think you can read about this. Mm-hmm. I heard this story. He went there and warned them, and they didn't. They were like, "Whatever."
Well, that was the head of the Doane gang that delivered the message.
He probably thought it was worth money.
Yeah, because again, highwaymen, opportunists, and eventually they were kind of liked, but they got into a thing with a farmer in Phillipsburg and they killed him. And at that point, the sentiment towards them on both sides just turned to shit. And then he was hung, a couple others were hung, a couple took off to Canada, and another one just disappeared. But, and there were all kinds of sayings about him. Like, hey, you should never sneak up on a Doane, and there's, you know, curses around them and stuff. And then if you were, like, you know, superhumanly adept at doing crazy shit, they would say you're either a devil or a Doane. Huh. Yeah, because they were, I mean, these were the guys that would be on, you know, giant horses going full rip gallop and flying over fences, riding off of cliffs. They were kind of like the James Gang of the colonial era.
Is there living relatives?
Yeah. Just looking up the name when I was trying to jog stuff in my head today, there's like companies and stuff that, you know, pop up in the area still with the name. Fun. But they were, I don't know, they played quite a role going through that whole stretch of time. And
do I recall them laying booby traps in the woods too, or is that somebody else?
It might be somebody else, but I'm sure they would have. I mean, I'm sure what they did was just ambush. You know, they'd probably, you know, see a carriage coming, and, you know, they'd just find the perfect spot, and that would
sharp
be it.
Turn, knock a tree down. If you have a horse standing in the road, whatever, anything to get him to stop.
Yeah. And so, apparently they amassed a lot of wealth, and there's a story in. One of the things when I was, you know, looking for, I'd always go off looking for treasures and stuff just for fun, because it's fun doing the history and the research and stuff. But I found out that one of the bigger caves up in the Easton area that they talked about was a mile north of Easton. And I decided to go looking around there one day, and there's a quarry when you get a mile north of Easton. And if you climb up the, you know, cliff, there's a little trail that goes up and a couple little plateaus. When you get up to the highest level, there's a giant fracture cave right in the side, way up, halfway up the hill, going up towards Lafayette College. And you can get into the first part, but you have to squeeze through. It's a really tight squeeze, and there's one rock that's holding back like 5,000 pounds of rock on the other side, all rubble, because, you know, fracture cave. But if you go through that, you can hear water running down, and it's about 20 feet deep down into that in the bottom part. That's supposed to be one of the places where there was quite a bit of money stashed, but I guess they, in quarrying out the stone, this is just my theory, but at some point in the late 1800s or early 1900s, there was a huge spill of colonial era gold and silver that started washing up on the banks north of Easton. Just north of Easton, like that mile above. So
probably came out of there, or something else. Maybe they were working on the canal, whatever it may be. But it got disturbed, or maybe it was hidden right down by the river, and big flood came and knocked it loose. But people were down there pulling coins out, and you can still, if you go there, you know, and dig around with a metal detector, people hit colonial gold and silver and copper all along the Pennsylvania side north of Easton, which was probably from that stash.
That was in the 1950s, I think, when that happened.
Was
when
it?
people were down, pulling out the coins.
Okay.
From the erosion.
There you go.
Yeah.
So they were coming out of the bank up there.
Yeah.
And
that's wild.
That's as far as my brain goes right now. But there is supposed to be somewhere in Berks County a big stash, and up along the creek from Point Pleasant, Pennsylvania, which is like 2/3 of the way to New Hope on the Pennsylvania side from here. There's a creek that runs way up, and there's supposed to be some stashes or a stash up there. And Lord knows they could be all over the place too. So I don't know. That's a fun one. If anything else comes to mind about them, I used to know quite a bit more.
Down there with some metal detectors, right? The underwater ones, there's probably stuff in the river that nobody got.
Yeah, deeper spots. Yeah, if it was
downstream and stuff, I bet does a metal detector pick up gold?
Oh yeah.
Silver?
Yeah, non-ferrous, ferrous, non-ferrous, what is it? Yeah, it depends. Yeah, it depends where you set the discrimination on them. But the problem with picking up gold is it's in the same range as aluminum. So there's so many pull tabs. You're gonna dig
everywhere.
You're gonna dig 400 or 500 tabs before you pick up a piece of gold. Unless you're in a place where no humans have been, then you're probably hitting.
But
beer caps from all the way up to Milford down there.
But
yeah.
Now, if the river's low and you get, a mask and fins and get a nice, $400, $300, something you can go underwater with and just start scouring up and down that part of the river, you may hit a pocket because like gold will hit the deep pockets and stick. So and it'll settle right into the mud down onto the bedrock. But
sure it would.
You could probably pick it up a foot or 18 inches down if there was a good bit of it. So I don't know.
Now, we'll ease into some Native American stuff locally.
Yeah.
Type thing. So let's just start with the basics. Is that what tribes were either up here, down your way, down eastern area, and what was cooking?
As far as I understand, Delaware, the term Delaware River and Delaware Indians, it's from a European name, basically. It's either French or German, I think.
French, Lord
So,
Delaware.
yeah, so the Lenape were the original people. That's what they called themselves.
And there were three branches
three
of them.
clans, and there was the wolf, the turtle, and the turkey. So I'm imagining the turtle probably was in northern Delaware, southern New Jersey. The wolf was probably in the northern part.
That's
right?
smart
and
thinking,
the turkey
Don.
maybe central New Jersey.
I don't know how they were laid out, but that's pretty clever that you
I
said.
know there was
guessing,
a turkey, but it was three different animal names from everything I read.
I've also read that like the Indians from the farthest north might not fully understand the Indians from the farthest south end of the
Yes,
of the
correct.
tribes. They would understand some words, but almost like Guatemalans and Mexicans.
I heard a Lenape man speak about a month ago at Lehigh University. There's very few people that can actually speak the language still. Mm-hmm. And what I didn't realize was that William Penn, who was credited with founding Pennsylvania and the city of Philadelphia, he was a Quaker, and he was given a land grant, well, not because of what he did, but because of what his father did. His father was an admiral in the British Navy, and they were fighting with the Dutch at the time, I think in the 1650s, somewhere in there. So Penn's father made a big name for himself. He was in favor of the king at the time, I think it was Charles II. On the other hand, William Penn was a rebel. He had met George Fox, the Quaker, and
Quakers.
Being a son of a wealthy parents, he was given a mini tour of Europe in Germany, France, and Italy. And what he picked up on was the discrimination, the disparity of wealth. So he got to hang out with the wealthier classes, the dukes, the duchesses, the kings, and
Kind
so
of
forth.
like a European Siddhartha.
Yeah, exactly. And he saw the poor. There was 90% of the people didn't have much. They were just scraping by, sort of like today a little bit, right? And he went to jail for about 3 months. He was in jail. They didn't know what to do with him because he was the son of a well-respected retired admiral. And
so it looks bad.
Yeah. But the Duke of York, who became James I, the King of England, wanted to help him out, got him out of jail, and said, "Look, I want you to go to the New World. We're going to give you this big tract of land." Now the Swedes and the Dutch were already in this area, right? And he said, and Penn said, "Yeah, great, I want to do that." And he took a lot of the Quakers with him, and he wanted to build a city, which is Philadelphia, became all the way along the Delaware, like a 20-mile long city. Didn't work out that way because land was already taken.
He got 10 of it.
But he wanted to call it Sylvania, but his father's name was Penn, and the king insisted, "I'm giving you this land. It's going to be called Pennsylvania in honor of your father, not you." So he came here, and I forget the man who laid out the town, but basically they laid it out in a grid, Market Street being the main street, what would be south-north, and then...
Never looked at it, but I bet it's got that whole Mason
Yeah,
thing
but he
laid
would
out like DC.
Yeah, but he would run. He learned. I've mentioned the language because he actually learned Lenape, and there's like 575 tribes today that are federally recognized. So you can imagine there's 20 million native people here
Right.
between Alaska and the tip of South America. So you can imagine
that's
huge
the low
complexity.
estimate on that. I think is like 120 million.
Well,
We don't
that's
we
the
don't
whole
really know. We don't know.
There's a lot of
Well, you said South America, right?
Yes. the
Yeah,
pre-
pre-contact-
South America to Alaska, pre-contact was
pre-contact
120 million.
Yeah,
at
and they
least
think
100
after
million.
contact, half of them were dead within like
100 years or so
something, yeah.
from diseases going
So that's why
through.
Europeans would land and find whole, just half-rotted villages that would have had 1,000 people, and there's only 50 people living in them.
Yeah.
Right.
And only a little part still operating. That was a common thing, apparently.
So
Yep.
to make a
Because
long
disease spread so
story,
fast.
It did most of the.
to make
most
a
of the
long
killing
story
before
short,
everyone else
he
got
laid
there.
out the village, which became the city. There were people obviously already there. As I mentioned, the Swedes, the Dutch, and other people, people from Germany. And there were things going on. I don't want to go into the details, but
Don, what year was that, Philly? When he
1670s.
So the Dutch were
1680.
already here in
The Dutch
1610.
West India Company.
They were here in
They were-
1610 already. So
Oh,
go ahead.
yeah.
Yeah, because this
Yeah,
is
yeah.
interesting because the walk and purchase happened, and I know
That
like,
was 1737.
things changed like between the ownership because I know Van Wise down in Delaware Water Gap, and their family came here then.
Dutch.
Okay.
They're still down there. Yeah, the one
Right.
farmhouse I used to work in.
Really?
It was
Okay.
built in 1730, but it was pretty amazing. Their story and on the records they are in on the muster call for when the French and Indian War happened. They were in Shawnee. It talks about a side and a half of beef, 20 hatchets, all these things.
Yeah.
But their families in there,
Right.
and they were Dutch then, and
Okay.
they still were. So this was just before. Well, they weren't Dutch no more because I guess at some point that got given to. He was English, right? William Penn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we all know about marathon races, and there's a native man, a native elder, a Lenape, who's a European, did a painting of him, and I put it into a mural I did. But he apparently signed on to this agreement, the walking purchase that you mentioned, right?
Yeah.
And what it was supposed to be was the distance from wherever, probably central Bucks County, to as far as a man could walk in a day, right? So this is what the natives said, okay, how far can somebody walk in a day? Not that far. So, now
Yeah.
William Penn,
500
unfortunately, had
Olympic
gone back to
sprinters.
England. He died in England. His wife took over the running of the city of Philly. She came back for 13 years and ran it. However, they had incurred debt. So I don't know which one of Penn's sons, but one of them, or maybe both of them, had the idea, we need money, we're in debt, let's sell a lot of land to all these settlers that are bunched up on the river, right?
And they were crying for lumber too, correct?
Exactly,
Right.
lumber, farming, whatever. And so the native people that were there, probably in the eastern area, agreed. And what he did, he found the 3 fastest runners that he could find. Not only that, but he had axemen go out and basically clear a rough path through a couple weeks before through where they were going to run. All right. So apparently, according to this native person that gave a talk at Lehigh, you've been in races, all of you, a lot of you, probably all of you, or been looking at races. So when this happened, the natives didn't know this. There was a relay. It was a relay race.
Right.
And they went, God knows, 75 miles? I don't even know. Nobody seems to know. But here's the thing. There were people along the route, the native people, jumping up and down saying, no, there's no running. You should be walking, and the settlers are going, go
caused
for
a
it,
war.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, and they probably went to the Lehigh at the forks, the Lehigh River where it enters the Delaware. And
that was when the Indians after that went burning up the Delaware River, and they came through Stroudsburg.
Yeah.
You can read about all this. A whole bunch of
here's
stuff.
here's the thing. Here's the
something early 1740s.
63 or 56. I don't know what year that was when they went nuts. They burned a house down here in 1756, I think. It was in
That's about the right era.
The
That was it.
That all happened then too. Yeah, with the
it was the
And-
big race.
I think hundreds
so
of
they-
Indians
you
went
know,
north
it was-
from Bethlehem and burned
killed
everything they
everything.
could on their way. And they went in New York and what?
General
And
Sullivan.
that same
He chased them right
Yeah,
after
yeah,
that.
yeah.
The same
Well, that
era
was
in the
during-
Southwest, there was a
Crazy.
huge uprising too, where they routed out every single Spanish colony and drove them back down into Mexico, from Arizona, New Mexico, everywhere through there. And I need to look up the dates and see, but it's very close to when that happened here.
Probably not
Makes
related.
sense.
But yeah, supposedly, yeah, they burned everything, like every farmhouse and settlement that was from Scranton all the way down to Easton. You either just got up and ran and made it back to Easton, or you got burned out.
Everybody ran to
And
their
killed.
closest fort at that point because they had at that point many forts from Bethlehem all the way to where would they have gone to, like to Milford, right? That was the chain of forts.
Right.
So whatever closest fort you were mustered to, that's where you would get to.
Yeah,
once you
but
made it
even
burn
then, all the
villages.
forts, I think all the forts were routed too.
Couple
Like,
were.
it-
The one in Stroudsburg didn't get. We're going to build that chimney there. That's where they were
that's
all
it.
holed up. Yeah, that did not. The
That
one
one-
down there. There's one down. Well, that in Kunkeltown they have the grave where they killed that family, the German family. They killed 7 of them, the kids and the wife and the dad. And killed them all. And I think they burned that one fort that was down there.
Mhm.
You can read about all this stuff if you
Yeah.
Google it all. I have, and I've gone to some of these sites. Pretty amazing.
And then
Have it
George
right here,
Washington, after that happened, yeah, he said
Sullivan, and that was the.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was terrible.
He wiped them all out one blow, right?
he sent him all
Yeah,
the way up.
he gave Sullivan a third of all his army
Right.
to go up through and into New York State.
And
And
that's
they
where
basically
Sullivan
killed
Trail
the
comes
native
from. That cuts
leaders
through here in the Poconos.
Burned their villages. and
They went through the
killed
whole
people.
Wyoming Valley, but I heard a lot of it they had abandoned it because they heard that they were coming. But anyone they found was just axed.
So my understanding is when they got up by Binghamton area, he detached the cavalry and ran them up the Hudson Valley,
Okay.
causing trouble, and the Braves chased them. A couple thousand Braves, but they're on horses, so they're faster.
Yeah.
And the infantry went toward Troy and burned down all their corn stalks and went up toward the Finger Lakes and swung around and back down Erie. So the
Okay.
following winter, they said 30,000 Iroquois starved to death.
Okay.
So they didn't beat them in combat. There was really no
But
battles.
killed the
Yeah.
food
Small
supply.
skirmishes, but that's what happened to the Iroquois.
Okay.
Totally wiped them out in one blow. And the thing is so I think the Walk and Purchase massacres was different from the Sullivan campaign. They were
Yes.
about 30
Okay.
guys
Oh, yeah.
apart, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
About 20 years.
I don't know that there was any reparation or any like any kind of. I don't think they ever paid him back for the Walk and Purchase massacres. I don't think there was no army went out and. I don't know what happened to the Lenape. I know 68 treaties were broke on them, and they're in
Yeah.
four reservations around the country right
Yeah,
now.
they're
One's
mostly
in
in
Jersey,
mostly in Oklahoma.
2 in Oklahoma.
Well, what this man said, who was giving the talk, he said they moved. Right, Mary? Did you hear that talk?
No,
You were
I
in
didn't-
another
I
place.
didn't,
Okay,
yeah.
you were in another talk. He claimed they went over a period of 137 years. Imagine your family, right?
Right.
8 generations. Walking for 137 years, they went to 30 different locations,
Right.
and they ended up now 2 are in Oklahoma, and I think one's in Wisconsin for some reason.
And that's some weird place in the
Yeah,
north.
yeah.
Yeah, because
So
the
if they were
families would.
walking all that, I'm sorry, Tom.
No,
They
go
were
ahead.
walking all that time, going what they were being turned down at locations until
Probably,
they made it.
yeah,
to
probably.
Oklahoma?
You can stay here, but don't stay too long. Maybe that
Okay.
kind of thing. Or,
Some of it was just straight up broken treaties. Like we're selling
yeah,
this
yeah,
land, they're like
exactly.
great, and they get done, they build their house, and 20 years later they're like, hey, you got to get out for whatever reason. There's various 68. You can look. I think it was 68 different treaties signed and settled, and there was a lot of different dynamics to how they got kicked out of each place. And I think as it went, there's a small reservation in Jersey. I think that some of the original tribes stayed there. They're still there. I don't know where. Do you know where that is?
Is that Berkeley Heights area?
I
or
don't have
something?
any idea where it is.
I
It's
know
somewhere.
there's a small one somewhere off of 78.
That's still like the original people. They never left, but some of them you can read about. They'd go to one place, and then some said, "Hey, we're signing this treaty," and these ones said no, and then these guys got. There was a couple wars when they were out in Ohio. Right, King Phillips War. What was the guy? In the 1830s, they started fighting in Davy Crockett era. Some of the Lenape were there.
Black Hawk, or no? That was in Ohio area, Indiana.
Fight No More Forever. Who was that guy? What's his name, man?
Yeah, a
Not
Sioux,
King
Sioux
Philip,
warrior.
Anyway, there were some Indian chiefs that started wars from the Ohio Valley, so some of the Lenape joined them. Some signed treaties after the war of 1812 and went to Wisconsin. The rest fought again and lost. Damn, I can't remember this guy's name. He was real famous. Anyway, yeah, and I think that's how they got split up, because different families would sign different treaties for different reasons. You know, you guys are going to go with these guys and fight them, and we're not. We're tired. We're going to Wisconsin. So
I think one of
that's how they got
the
split up.
reasons that the Lenape
Pontiac.
accepted
Pontiac's rebellion. It was Pontiac. Some of them sided with him.
One of the reasons that the Lenape accepted the Europeans in general, I think, in the beginning, was, well, there were a lot of Quakers. Penn brought a lot of the Quakers.
They were
the
cool.
society
They didn't seem to have problems.
They were nonviolent for the most part.
Yep.
But I don't want to go into that whole story. But the Lenape were a matriarchal society. So if you were a man and you wanted to marry this woman that you were attracted to, you would go to your wife's family's house. The man would go to the woman's family's house and live there. So women generally are not known for starting wars through history.
Amazing.
It's usually the men. All right, we know that. So that's part of the reason that things were kind of cool. They were kind of okay for a while, you know. I mean, he ran foot races with the natives, you know, Penn did. He got them, he learned their language.
The Dutch and the Swedes and these guys lived here for like 130 years or something with them in relative peace, right? And my understanding, and I thought about this like, conspiracies, but Ben Franklin, like if you read about, was it Ganadahutin, so the Quakers wouldn't allow a standing militia here. Right?
That's probably part of it.
Yeah. Ben Franklin and all these other guys are like, we need a militia here. And I don't know how this worked. There must have been a standing government of the time saying, no. And then Ganadahutin burnt down and they killed the 10 Swedes there. And then when I read about this, like within 10 days, the army was there. And I go, Jesus, it would have took 20 days to tell anyone. So I think Franklin, I really think, and this is my crazy theory, he just sent his buddies up there to dress like Indians and burn a place down, and the army's right behind him. I swear. When I read that, I go, the dates will match up. It would have took 3 months to get there, and they were there in 3 weeks. I go, these guys are up to no good. They wanted the Indians out. They were trying to get militias in here for 30 years before that. You can read about this. It's not even hidden. But that's my crazy conspiracy theory about our founding fathers, right?
Yeah.
Because right after that, then the militias came to be in Pennsylvania, and the Indians are bad, and we got to do something. And I think it had to do with lumber mostly and hides, right? Hides. Pelts was the big thing. Europe wanted beaver skin hats, and right. I mean, in Arizona they killed 300,000 beavers in like 2 decades or something. They dried up the whole river.
In all of Canada too.
Ben Franklin, when he went to France to negotiate with the French king to send weapons and ships mainly to fight against the British, he wore beaver skin.
That's right, and they loved it.
And everybody was like, "Wow, we got to have that." Yeah, millions of beavers were killed just because of that.
He'd be hustling.
Because it was a huge commodity. It was a huge commodity. And, you know, you go out in the woods, you shoot as many beavers as you can, bring the pelts back, you make money. And it's a shame, but it's still going on.
And the Indian braves, you know, you got a gun all of a sudden. Like, if you know about, like, I think it was the Huron and the Iroquois. Once the Iroquois got guns, they had been fighting for like 100 years. Once they got guns, they whooped them in 10 years, all the way past Lake Huron. Right. So, like, I'll sell beaver hides all day long, man. Give me some guns, man. That's what happened.
Well, the Europeans had a very low opinion generally of Native people unless they got to know them. Because even in the Mexican War, in 1848, we took over what's now New Mexico, Arizona, and the Mexican government agreed. But in the agreement, our government said, even though you're ceding this land to us, your government and our government has to combine and fight the savage Apaches that are in this area.
Right.
Doesn't matter that we just, stole your land by force. But you're going to help us get the savage in.
Now they call them terrorists. They used to call them savages. A fun tidbit, like slightly off topic, but going back to the root of the whole thing. Have you ever heard of John White, the illustrator?
Yes.
So,
he's very famous.
1580s or so. What's that?
He drew the pics and stuff. Right?
Yeah, he drew the pics, and but they sent him up and down the East Coast to chronicle everything and do sketches of all the tribes and all the things that were to be seen in the New World in the 1580s and bring them back.
I would love to see that.
And it's online. Well, here you go. I'll give you some pictures. But the first one's of a Pict. How they used to tattoo themselves. But this is in the 1580s. But he did illustrations from the Indian villages before they were all. If you scroll over one to the left or right, you'll get to a Native American, one of his sketches. There's a book, and I've got it somewhere. But what's interesting in it is that they talk about how you would come into Indian villages in the 1500s up and down the East Coast here, and you couldn't tell that you weren't in a village somewhere in London because there was such a strong Anglo-Saxon influence in the people. And then you go back to 20,000 years ago, there were the Solutrean people in France. You might have seen that thing years ago.
Yeah, we talked about this.
And they supposedly came across in boats hunting seals, and 20,000 years ago were populating the east coast of the United States.
It only makes sense.
And the reason how you see that is in the spear, well, the flint technology and the way they shape their spear tips and their arrowheads and their tools.
And the blue-eyed Cherokees. There's a whole bunch of weird
thing. That was
shit.
that influence from over on this side of the pond. But the spear tips in France 20,000 years ago, and arrowheads and just stone technology, the lithic technology of France 20,000 years ago, matches the pre-Clovis, like before Clovis stuff. You know about the Clovis tips that have the flutes put up them, and they were for hunting bigger animals like megafauna and stuff. But before that, there's deposits on the East Coast that they find that are all Solutrean, like they're just dead matches for these points
And
they find in France from 20,000 years ago.
Right?
They didn't need to. Everything was there, and God, this land's got everything in it. And God, before all the cataclysm and disaster 12,000 years ago, it must have been like Eden here. So, I mean, it's still pretty nice, but I mean, imagine the whole East Coast goes out another 50, 60, 80 miles, into the ocean. And the oceans are 400 feet lower, and they're still pulling up mammoth bones and megafauna bones off the Jersey coastline when they dredge. And that's not just the English Channel; they're all off of the Jersey coast sitting down there.
Right.
So, yeah, there's a strong chance, just looking at that in the 1500s that there was a strong, genetic presence. I think they call it haplogroup X, but on the East Coast is kind of interesting. But all that's wiped out and eaten by history. That's the most fun part about history, I think, is finding the shit that's been erased, but is there and there's evidence for. I don't know. It's if you're going to take the conspiracy angle, it's.
The Solutrean theory makes sense. The one I read made the most sense was that when the ice sheets were breaking up, the hunters would be on them. Mm-hmm. Hundreds of people, men, women, children. And, an ice sheet half the size of Rhode Island crack off and float to America, and they wouldn't know the difference. They're on the thing. They got their boats there. They're making fires out of fat. They live on this. Yeah. It doesn't matter. And so they just hop off, and there they are, yeah. I mean, that just makes sense.
Mm-hmm. There was a wall of glaciers, I think supposedly 20,000 years ago, that would have gone from Nova Scotia probably over to around England.
Right around the world, like
and they were following the seals. Yeah. And they were following the seals across, and that whole thing got blasted pretty quickly. Whatever blasted it 20,000 years ago. 12,000 years ago, 12,800, whatever it is. But yeah, that's the idea behind the the diversity that was sitting on this continent. And then 50,000 years ago, there was a genetic split. You've heard about this one, of the Aborigines, I think. In the South Pacific, but there's a genetic tie to people in South America on the West Coast that's tied to the Aborigines in Australia, but the divergence happened 50,000 years ago. So there were people sitting there 50,000 years ago that were moving through there, and with the oceans lower like they were, it was probably, there were more islands, it was easier to travel, by boat across the South Pacific to that area. And then you did have Beringia and stuff.
It would reduce the frequency of the swells.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. 400 feet lower, 450 feet lower across the entire planet with 2-mile ice caps.
All the way to Delaware Water Gap.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Right? The world was so different. But yeah, they're all like, man, they only came here 12,000 years ago. But they've got that one they pushed back right in Pennsylvania, in western Pennsylvania, to like 15,000 years ago. And now there's like mammoth kill sites in California 120,000 years ago.
Yes.
And then there's something with the diatoms in the soil in Mexico that puts it back in that range too, which I forget how that all worked because I saw that like 15 years ago, but it was interesting stuff. Anyway, I had to throw some of that John White stuff in there because if you look him up and start, reading through the book that goes along with all the illustrations, and just taking their words for the accounts of, they're like, we can't tell the difference in some of these villages between walking through, somewhere in the countryside of England, as far as the genetics go. So it's been a melting pot.
Do you know about the eclectics,
No,
Don? Do you notice in the 1830s the church groups that were...
I've heard of them. I don't know much about them.
You can find it. They were documenting medicine, food, all kinds of things about the Lenape. They knew it was getting erased, and they said, I forget what churches it was or what people, but they were in Pennsylvania, somewhere in mid-Pennsylvania. They have a lot of history about the Lenape tribes and different things.
Yeah, there's always talk about how we need to be prepared for emergencies, like a dire emergency where the electric grid goes down and we're basically out foraging and that kind of thing.
It's 200 years ago all of a sudden.
Yeah.
Which is what the world has been for millions of years.
So we would have to do that, but the Lenape did not need an emergency plan because they were living it. They had thousands of years to know the animals, their habits, where they were.
Yeah,
they respected them. They needed them. They knew that. They knew they were the top species, the humans. Yeah, but
do you know
the medicine, the medicinal plants, the plants that were used for food?
The CVS was right in the woods.
Yeah,
you just go for a 2-mile walk.
Exactly, right.
You have everything you
But
need.
so it was all here. They learned all that. They had their issues, they had their problems, but they were self-sufficient. Yeah, if they ran out of game or there was a dry season, maybe they moved 40 miles or 50 miles, whatever. But they did a lot of trading. I mean, Pennsylvania has 83,000 miles of rivers and streams. The only state that has more than that is Alaska. A lot of people don't know that. Yeah,
that's cool.
But about a quarter of them are compromised right now with different types of toxins.
Yeah, like some of the most watersheds too in the world. Like from here, you can go like to anywhere. You could go down to Mississippi. You could go out to St. Lawrence.
Yes.
You could go down to Chesapeake.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, from the Ohio, the Ohio
Right, you can
River.
go all the way to St. Louis.
It's wherever the divide is.
The Schuylkill goes into the Chesapeake.
Yeah.
So they would go down to the shore a lot to meet the other groups, the other clans, and train and hang out on the
Indians, I think
Atlantic.
we're down there in the Chesapeake. Something. What's that book? Oh, what's his name? The guy that did Poland, James Michener. He did the Chesapeake. You ever read
Yes,
that?
I did read it.
Right,
It's a
isn't that
really
great?
good book. It's worth rereading. Yeah.
Now, from my understanding, they said if the Europeans didn't come, it wouldn't be but 100 years or so that the Iroquois would have had them all. But pretty much the Iroquois were whooping them, right? They had to pay tribute to the Iroquois. Isn't this true? The Iroquois had to work calling women. They wouldn't let them.
Didn't they have their own constitution, which we copied?
The Iroquois, some people
I think so.
claim
That's
that.
what I've
Yeah,
heard.
No, the Constitution of the United States was modeled after all the Appalachian tribes. There was an agreement, and there's a wampum belt you can look up if you look up Native American Constitution. I'm pretty sure it's a language. I don't know how it works. I mean, everyone thinks it's wampum. It's bits of shells and stuff. But if you look at it, it's like a code,
pictograph,
and it is a written language, and it's the set laws of mutual respect between the peoples up and down.
People just pass them to tribes. They end up halfway across
and
the
the
country.
founding fathers
You
knew
can say
about
that,
that, and they used that and modeled the American Constitution after the Constitution that was in place by the Native American tribes on the East Coast.
I think what he's saying is the Iroquois.
Here's the thing. Mary just reminded me of this. The man that was speaking that I heard at Lehigh, he's a professor there. Right? So, and there's 2 or 3 that are Native American professors there. They have a degree in anthropology or political science even. But he made a comment at the end. He said, "We are coming back." And what he meant was he's trying to get young people, and they've already done it. They've brought a lot of teenagers over a period of time back to the Water Gap area, because this is where this was their homeland.
Right.
And quite different than Oklahoma, if you've been in Oklahoma at all. So what he meant by that, I think, is a couple of things. Physically, he's trying to bring young people back here to live here and maybe reinvigorate the philosophy or the values of Native people maybe in general, because we have reached a point where, you go back 300 or 400 years ago, you were talking about this, that we were pretty much self-sufficient. We brought what we knew from Europe, if our ancestors are from Europe, and most of them were. We're at the point now where a lot
the
has
shells,
been, a
you'll
lot
see
has
they're white
been,
and black. It's a language.
a lot has been taken out of our hands. Most people don't have land to do farming or build their own houses.
Yeah, it's
that kind
pretty
of thing,
ridiculous.
or even grow their own food.
Yeah, it's
right?
pretty ridiculous.
So I think that's part of what he was saying. We're at a point where we need to come back and look at what was of value in those people. And there was a lot in value.
I always say that the only people that are removed from their food production or ownership of is like slaves or prisoners. And America doesn't control one bit of its food. It's there's a lot of pepper and onion gardens and some tomatoes, but you're not going to run a culture on tomatoes and cucumbers.
No.
You're right about what you're saying. Just makes sense. Pretty neat.
You've seen that before, haven't you?
Yeah. I think, yeah.
But I don't know. Well,
I'm sure they were familiar with it. They all had lived here for decades and were amongst these Indians right here. Yeah, the Iroquois had some kind of constitution because they combined all them 6 tribes together, and they had some kind of written thing.
Oh, that reminds me of the other thing. So I've read, in research I was doing in the Southwest and research I've done back here, that there was a common sign language that was used across the whole continent. So even if you had different dialects, wherever you went, you could communicate.
Amongst the Native Americans.
Amongst the pre-Columbian, people, you could get your point across.
What was in Connecticut? What kind of Indians would have been up there? They were,
I don't know, are you getting into Mohawk
Nanaco?
up there?
No.
Mohican and Cherokee?
No. Cherokee was
Tennessee.
Narragansett.
Narragansett.
That's what I think they were. They spoke a different language up there.
I'm trying to...
They spoke out. No, these were Algonquin speakers, I think, right?
Algonquin.
Those were. I'll remember it. Pretty neat, man, that all these different tribes lived here.
Yeah.
Really, I find it fascinating. Hey, I was telling Emily today. There's a Lenape burial ground right in Henryville that my friend owns property there, and we were there. They think it was in use for a few thousand years. They think it's about 8,000 years old, so it would have been. It's really wild. You go through the woods and it's eerie. It's just these big mounds, and some of them have holes in them. And I guess they laid the bodies on them. Animals would eat them, probably. So
it's kind of like the Buddhist thing with the birds, throw them out.
And my buddy Zig, he's an older guy. He's probably mid-80s, but he says, "Well, there, Tommy, when I moved here, I thought that was a bunch of pioneers down there doing a fool's errand, stacking rocks up some piles for whatever reason." He said, somehow over the years, or he lived there, he grew up in there.
These are they're like 12 feet tall, perfectly like built, perfectly uniform with corners.
They look, no corners, they're round, they look like turtle shells, they're just domes.
But they go up, right?
They go up. It's not like a stone road that was just thrown there. It's built. You can tell it's built. He said he had the federal Indian people come there eventually, and they studied this, and it's just the deal. And there must be, 20 mounds or so through the woods, maybe on a 10-acre plot. It's cool.
That's right around here, right? Henry
It's like 5-8 miles. And Jeff Henry, that lives over to the goat farm, was telling me about, when they plow that one field, they get all kind of broken arrow pieces and spears. Like, he has baskets at his house. You could go. If you called him and asked, he would let you go there. He would do a podcast too. But he thinks it was a camp where they worked on arrowheads, and he's like, I could just see the guy because there's so many broken pieces. He
if
thinks
there's a good flint deposit around,
and they would just fling it, and start again because there's all kind of broken tools. So he thinks either they were.
So that's the discard pile from.
Yeah, and they were like, if they would start with an arrowhead this big, eventually it would be this big. If it broke off, they didn't just get rid of it. They would chip it down and make it smaller, like we do with knives, right? A good knife, and eventually it's real tiny. So he thinks that's what they would do. And there's a spring right there, right by the one field. And when they plow it, you can see the 2 spots where there's fires. Because the dirt's this color, and right there's all this soot, and who knows how long they were there.
There was
he's got baskets of pieces and stone that's not from around here, like obsidian and these little weird stones, flakes.
That was traded. Yeah, this obsidian came from the Southwest and would make its way all the way back here. And there was a huge gathering that happened. Maybe it was every 10 years or something, right here in the Water Gap area, right in the Shawnee area. That was people would come from all over the country and trade, and it was like a set festival sort of that happened.
Like right on the top of the mountain, one of those mountains.
I think it might have been down by the river.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. You know, like I guess the Water Gap.
Mm-hmm.
There's that one mountain on the PA side. But
I know. I remember Bill telling me. I don't know how long ago this was. Maybe in the '80s, probably it sounded like. But he was working on, I guess, golf courses, and I think it was down in Shawnee, and they had an excavator going, and they got down 8 or 10 feet, and they popped up what they thought was like an old tire that was buried, but it turned out it was a massive bowl that was sitting underground like 10, 12 feet down, and it was all textured and stuff, and it had been, it looked like a tire track to them. So they figured, oh, what's this stuff? And they're like throwing it around. And then there was somebody had found a mammoth in the area, and mentioned it to that
Marshall's
guy.
Creek, they found a mammoth.
So they mentioned it to him, and they gave him a piece of the stuff, and he's like, where is it? And that guy came and looked, and he's like, oh, what did you do? Because they had just ripped it up and taken pieces and thrown it all over. But I mean, supposedly that was going on even 7,000-8,000 years ago back here. So that's some of the history and how deep it goes. Lord knows what was going on. If I had one thing I could do, it would be have a time machine.
To know.
I would love it
from a bird's eye view.
Yeah, to just be able to go right there and look.
The cool thing was about the Dutch, right? The copper road in Jersey, and you could look into this, but the Indians here had copper, but the closest copper would have been in the Mackinac Peninsula or Arizona or New Mexico, wherever it is. But these Indians had copper, so when they landed here, they said, "Ooh, there's copper," and somehow they thought there was copper in New York, so they came through the Gap. I think in 1604. Some of them were already. They came across the Hudson too, but long story short, they looked for copper for I think 115 years and never found any. And if you go up the the old
Copper Mine Road.
That road on the Jersey side goes all the way up, and then it goes up.
If you ever want to go, I'll take you straight.
There's
to
all
the
kind
mines.
of mines and stuff. They dug for 100 years and never found nothing.
The biggest one's right on the
Indians
creek,
had it from
but you
far
go
away.
up like 100 feet onto the hillside of the Water Gap from the first one on the creek.
What? It's an old mine.
Yeah, and I've been to the back of it. Now.
I want to go there.
Gated off. It's awesome.
Is this? You told us about this. It's like 2 levels, and they dug down and up.
Yeah,
and all
what
crazy.
they do, they're at the creek level because it's a deep gorge that goes like this. And you come up the creek and you can't miss it. It's right there. But that one's gated. But you go up about 100 feet and then you find another one that cuts down into the side of the hill at a 45-degree angle. You go up another 100 feet and there's another one. I think there's like 5 of them as you go up. And then if you go from there, you have to just kind of follow your gut. You keep walking up into the hill from there. You get to a big open field. And that's a Lenape burial ground, and there's a bunch of white stones set all over the place in that area.
I have to go there.
That's
How
an
far
awesome,
up is it from? What do you get off in Jersey side,
It's
right?
a nice 4 or 5 hour day project.
But I'm saying from like the bridge there at the
From
Gap.
the bridge, you do that jug handle. You come up to the 3-minute light. You get through that. Maybe another 6 miles up. It's like a 10-minute ride.
Oh, that's where Bigfoot lives. We should go there. Well, Frankie saw Bigfoot there for sure.
Did he?
Oh yeah.
He saw one.
Well, I don't know. I mean,
Well,
I don't know what he saw.
I'd like to sit and bullshit with him at some point, because that stuff's fun.
Oh yeah.
I won't go on.
Well, they were going to camp up there, and I wanted Isaac to get the night vision. We were going to make Bigfoot noises in the woods, but I thought he'll start shooting.
Yeah.
He'll start shooting in the dark. I was like, we better not.
I can draw the back of a Bigfoot. That's all I saw of a Bigfoot.
You could draw the back of one.
Yeah, in Oregon I saw one. But I just wanted to tell a story that Sean knows. It's about a relative on my mother's side.
This is a good one.
Yeah, Penelope
my
Van
cigarettes?
Princess. This has to do, we were talking about the Dutch in New Amsterdam, it's New York, back in the 17th century. So Penelope Van Princess and
What
her
year?
husband
Wait,
emigrated
what year?
From Holland. 1670s or somewhere in there.
So 1670.
Yeah, so they immigrated to New Amsterdam. It was a Dutch.
New York.
The Dutch had already bought it from the native people, and so they were, there for a number of years, and they kept looking across at what's the Atlantic Highlands, There's Fort Hancock there. It's an old fort. So if you're there at the tip of it, you can look and see Manhattan skyline and all that. So they got about 15 people together, the Dutch people, and they thought, hey, you know what? It's getting crowded here in New Amsterdam. So it doesn't look like there's much going on over there just across the bay. So they decided to take a small boat with a sail, and they went over, landed on the shore, no problem. They were looking around, and they sent 2 people, I believe, south a little bit, just to scout, because they knew there were native people, right? And they came back and said, yeah, we noticed something. There's people arming themselves, and they're aroused, you know, and they're going to start coming this way, I think. So we better leave. Penelope's husband happened to be sick. I don't know whether it was seasickness or something more serious. So they all decided to split. They said they wanted her to, like, leave your husband, don't worry, you know, whatever, we'll come back for him. She decided to stay with him, and they went back to New Amsterdam. So 4 or 5 of the Lenape came out and saw them, and just no questions asked, they just attacked them. And her husband was already laying on the beach. They killed him, and they hit her with an axe in her skull, and then somebody cut her with a knife or a hatchet across her stomach. And, okay, so they're both dead. They go back to their village. Penelope wasn't quite dead. She was still alive. And so night came, and she knew they were going to come back and probably finish her off. Somehow, she dragged herself to an old tree, a hollow tree. She got inside of it. It's the only thing she could do. She couldn't walk. Sure enough, an elder came back with a young brave the next day. Her husband was still there, still dead on the beach. And, of course, they're looking around, and they see these dark stains in the sand leading away into the brush.
Right to the tree, right?
They followed, they found her. She was still breathing, still conscious. And this is what she related later to her children and grandchildren. She just said, go ahead, you know, just put me out of my misery. And the chief, for whatever reason, decided not to do that. And he pulled her out of the tree and carried her back. Basically took probably deer hide and stitched her stomach up, did what he could for her head. And she lived there for a couple of years. And so the rumor got around in New Amsterdam, whatever happened to Penelope, because all these other people went back. And what happened
looking
to the
for
husband.
him, and she wasn't there.
Exactly, yeah. And so finally, I don't know how the communication was, but people came back from New Amsterdam, met with this group of natives. She was still there living with them. And the chief asked her, she had learned some of the language, obviously, and said, you know, you're welcome to stay with us. You're like one of us. You know the language. You know our customs. You're welcome to...
Oh, if you want, go for it.
You're welcome to stay here.
It's not a joint. It's a cigarette.
No, thank you. I don't know what you're doing with that.
So
you got your cigarette.
So all right. So this is going on too long. So long story short, she said thank you very much. Probably gave that man who saved her life a big hug. Said goodbye to the people she knew. Went back to New Amsterdam.
The fabricated part.
All right. Well, yeah. All right. So what happened? You know the story of Rip Van Winkle. He woke up and, you know, well, the British flag was replaced by the American flag. But in this case, the British flag replaced the Dutch flag. So there was a man named Richard Stout. He met Penelope. She was probably something of a celebrity. She had this big scar in her head, and you know.
She lived with the Savages for right.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. She was
right,
probably
she'd be famous,
like
rock star status.
If there was like a TV show,
right.
TV podcast with Joe Rogan or something.
Right. Yeah.
So she ended up marrying Richard Stout, and they did go back to New Jersey with 30 or 40 people, I think. They founded the town of Middletown, New Jersey, around the 1680s, I think. They established the Baptist Church. A lot of people don't know the Baptist Church was formed in Holland or the Netherlands. So they established the Baptist Church in New Jersey. So the reason I'm saying all this, so Penelope had 10 children, or 9 children. They all were put to work on, you know, they made their clothes, they grew their crops, they raised their animals, they were totally self-sufficient. And So it was one of her great-grandchildren that married into my mother's family, into the Lee family.
Oh, wow.
So that was back in the early 1700s, I think, 1720s. Ichabod Lee, his name was. So that's the part of the lineage on my mother's
He was
side.
the father of Isaac?
Yes, Ichabod probably was.
Which is where you had
Oh, you
your
have
name
Lenape?
from.
You part Lenape?
I
just hung
wouldn't.
out with
Grandma
I wouldn't
Wilson.
say that. I mean, I wouldn't.
You gotta do a
no,
test
I wouldn't say that
sometime.
because
It's not going to be more
she
than
married an
3%,
Englishman.
but there's got to
But-
be something in there.
No, so I wouldn't say that. But so yeah, I mean, we're all related to each other.
Yeah.
We go back far
Yeah,
enough,
yeah.
right? It's like the story, right? 2, 4, 8, 16, 32.
Yeah, it's like
so,
we're all 14th cousins or something
something
like that.
along that line. Yeah.
You can see it in your eyes, though.
Well,
Grandma
well, I don't
Wilson.
She had a
If you-
little bit of a native look to her, a little bit.
You know, you can read about.
Your mother
You said about
did look like a native, partly.
Yeah,
Mhm.
You could see it in the eyes and the cheekbones.
yeah, could be.
Salad.
But anyway, the part I don't get, I don't know if I believe it, but people kept the family Bible. They had Bibles if they, if you could afford a Bible. Since Gutenberg, right, he put the Bible into German.
It's a good piece of history.
1485, something like that. So all the records, the births, the deaths, the weddings,
Right.
any pertinent information was put in the family Bible. So the
What's
one
the
we
family
had was
tree
donated
with
to the
religion?
Historical Society in Princeton because that's where the family lived till 1920, I guess. But anyway, yeah. So the part I don't believe, supposedly she lived to be 110 years old. Penelope did. So, and the grandkids would come up and she would let them feel her scars on her stomach. She would tell the story, and she had the big dent in her forehead. And,
Apparently, it's pretty common.
Grandma was
Like
a badass.
they were kidnapping whites and selling them off to the tribes further west when they got.
there was
Pretty-
intermarriage for sure.
Yeah, when they got way far west, they were finding all kind of like half-bred white and Indian people and
Right.
people that had been sold in as little girls, women that were in their 60s and 70s already, men, all kind of different people because they would do that.
So when you brought the paperwork you brought some writing here about this, and I was reading one
okay.
particular page, and I just happened to read one
You went through it
particular
also.
page, and at some point, I believe it was Penelope who landed by the Verrazano Narrows for a little bit.
Oh, okay, that's possible.
So the Verrazano, this is just a random coincidence,
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
but the Verrazano Narrows separate Staten Island from New Jersey and Brooklyn.
Right.
So she
right.
was like right where I
there.
grew up because I grew up
okay.
near the
Okay,
Verrazano
right,
Narrows
correct.
Bridge.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
yeah, so that was a fun.
Brooklyn's right across
Interesting.
from there, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
So Basil's
Because you can
good
either
friend.
go when you're going over that bridge and you get over it. You can go this way to go to Brooklyn. You can go this way to go to Long Island, or you can go this way to go to Jersey.
Strong Island.
Right.
And my buddy-
Strong Island, yo.
My buddy Basil has a good friend that lived right there, and they had a rent-controlled apartment just overlooking the Verrazano and the Hudson.
Yeah.
And I think they were paying. This was in the late '80s, but they were paying $500 a month for this beautiful big apartment on like probably
wow.
the eighth or ninth floor of this thing that was maybe a block or two north of the Verrazano Bridge. And we'd go there and hang out and party, and it was awesome.
You know what else?
And it's just funny to think. I used to sit out there on the balcony and look across right there, and that's where you were sitting.
That's where I was sitting on the other side, looking at you.
That's funny.
On one half of the Staten Island side of the Verrazano
Oh,
Bridge.
and that's Dave Powell's place, just in case he hears it.
Okay.
Hey, Dave.
Hi, Dave.
There on the
He's
on
an
the
awesome drummer.
on the Staten Island side of the Verrazano Bridge, they have these big stables there, and it's where they keep all the retired police horses from the NYPD.
Oh, cool.
And on like certain days, especially if you show up with a kid, so I'm little, and my father would bring me down there, and they'll let you in and see and pet on the retired police horses. But that's where they keep them, on the Staten Island side of the Verrazano Bridge.
Wow.
There's just big stables, and you'd never know it because it looks like a military barracks when you drive up on it.
Right.
It just looks militaristic.
It
But
keeps
that's-
everyone away.
Keeps
Them
everybody
horses
away.
are- Them
but
horses
that's where
are
all
pretty
the horses
impressive,
hang
man.
out.
They're impressive. You ever see them in crowds, like how they,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
and they had a pretty
A
next level.
friend of my father's would rescue them sometimes, and up in like I think it was up near Lake Ariel,
Oh.
and he has a big stable, and you hang out and these horses are like unflappable,
Yeah.
like things you couldn't do with a normal horse.
Fine command of the language, Albert.
Thank you.
Yeah. Fine command indeed.
So yeah, they were cool. They were cool.
Yeah, it was about the coronation, I guess, was this morning. I got up early for some reason.
Oh yeah,
Saw-
Charles.
Yeah.
Charles
On
the
Luke
Third.
Did you watch that?
Yeah, some of it.
Oh, that's
Future
was it?
history.
Yeah. And
Future
yeah,
history.
Yeah.
Thank you for bringing that up. I forgot. I knew this morning. Forgot about
The
it.
coronation.
They had a whole cavalry section. And
Pretty
then-
cool, huh?
Yeah, and then you saw there's giant piles of horse shit, and there's
Oh,
like
God.
4,000 soldiers just like walking
Eating the
towards
horse shit.
in the
Oh,
parade.
God.
I'm like,
Walk
oh,
in the horse shit.
God. Yeah.
Oh, God.
Do it.
They didn't even freak stride it. It was fun.
Smash right through it.
Right.
The horses were cool though.
I got a bit of a buzz going, and
Me too.
And
Well,
there's a history thing
Yeah.
going. So,
Yeah.
talking
Speaking
about the
of-
horses.
Speaking of coronation,
Okay, you go ahead.
1559, our ancestor on my mother's side again, he was the Lord Mayor of London. And there was a 3-day
asshole.
party. In 1559, it was basically a 3-day party for the coronation of Elizabeth I. So he was like out in the front, leading people down to Westminster. And he was only there for 2 years. Don't know why.
Now, the
But,
Lord,
his name was Thomas Lee.
there's still a
Thomas
Lord
Lee.
Mayor of London that exists in the city of London. That's they're elected every for 4 or 8 year terms or something. I don't know. But in the city of London, you've heard about that, right? Like there's like the Vatican City, which is its own sovereign sort of nation.
Yeah.
Oh, they have one of
DC.
those?
Yeah,
Oh,
in the
nice.
Vatican City, but London has a squared off area, which is the City of London, which is its own sovereign nation, and all the banking is controlled from there, and it was back then. And if you were the Lord Mayor of London, you were in charge of all the banking coming out of London in 1559. So that guy was more than likely an asshole.
Well, could be. We'll never know.
I like where you went with that.
But you know what's
He had
interesting
to do
is
something
he
to get to
packed,
where he was.
He,
Yeah.
it was
Oh, he
either
did
him.
something.
It was either him or his son though that packed up and shot over here in the 1600s though. So he might have done something else because he definitely hightailed it out of there, came over here when it wasn't pleasant to be here yet. So
Yeah, definitely.
That was
wouldn't have been pleasant at that point.
160 years later.
that's
So it was
something you
Joseph Lee came here in 1709,
okay.
quite a bit later, but somebody in that line.
Well, anyway,
Yeah.
there's my dog being an asshole.
He wants to
And,
go out.
and that talking about horses, I just got to tell a bit of Dalmatian history because whatever 5 years ago we were honored with the presence of Ringo, who's half Dalmatian and
He has
half
to go out.
Labrador.
He has to go out. Yeah.
And he's an unusual dog, and he was a challenging dog, and that made me start looking up the history of these two breeds. And what I didn't know about the Labradors is that their initial thing and their initial breeding was for up in the northern parts of Europe, in the North Atlantic over there. The Labradors were bred to retrieve fishing nets in the ocean. So, like, imagine jumping into the water and swimming out and grabbing onto a fishing net and bringing it back. That's why they're water dogs, and they're good at swimming because they would be swimming through the ocean, when it's full ice. But the more interesting part of that was the Dalmatian. I knew about Labs and the Lab personality, but there's something with the Dalmatians. And the thing with the Dalmatians, well, skip all the way back to Egypt. There's hieroglyphics and images of spotted dogs running with the chariots going into battle back in Egypt. And Dalmatians have been tied to horses and been stable dogs all the way probably 4,000 years. I mean, if you're going to follow that, and nobody knew about them. They were used as sentry and guard dogs like 500 years ago in Dalmatia. And they were discovered and then brought back to Europe and used as carriage dogs. And that's how they ended up being associated with the firemen and the carriages and stuff, back in the 1700s, 1800s, 1900s. You would keep a Dalmatian around. That's why the firehouse had a Dalmatian with it, because they were all pulled by all the carriages to put out fires and carry the firemen. They used the Dalmatians to protect the horses. So the Dalmatian's job was to sit on point and keep the horses safe, but that's the history of the Dalmatian. It goes back to Egypt, running into battle with horses, and they've been alongside horses and hunter and gatherers for the next 3,000 years, and then they discovered them 500 years ago and brought them over to Europe and inbred them for 500 years, and now they're all deaf and fucked up. But,
well, a couple of years ago, I read a little bit of the history of the Mastiffs.
Okay.
So I grew up with 2 Mastiffs. Kim's family has a Mastiff.
Okay.
So in England, the English Mastiff specifically, one of the reasons why they tend to be a gentle dog, so they were bred for battle.
Yeah.
But they were bred not to ever attack the enemy, but to literally pin them down and look scary, but to never touch them, so that the soldiers could come and take them and say, okay, you're going to be prisoners now. So they would just sit on the enemy soldier, and these are big dogs.
150, 60-pound dogs.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So they sit there and
even.
growl at them.
Big ones.
Look scary. So you're either paralyzed because they're on top of you, or you're paralyzed by fear.
Don't
of this
move or I'll rip your
dog.
throat. They're probably trained to take you down anyway.
Yeah.
Because I had dogs.
Or if you go back to the 15th century, you probably had armor on, and that's another way.
Yeah.
And then the dog on top of that, you're not going to tend to get up.
No, you're not going anywhere.
Right.
And there's every angle you can take with history.
It's neat stuff.
It is. Seems like that bit.
So while we're on the topic of Native Americans, we might have talked about this on a past podcast, but if we could briefly go down the path of Tom Quick and retell some of those stories. So he was another one who started off friendly with the Indians.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
As much as I can remember of the story, I know I went on about this like in the first one back in the 30s and another one back in the 60s or 70s, but I'll try to dive as deep as I can into my brain on the story, or my brain, into the story, as much as I can remember. And as much as I remember is, it must have been sometime in the early mid 1700s, and Tom's father was a pastor, and he came up north of the Water Gap, like Milford area, I believe, and set up a farm. And at this point, there hadn't been a lot of colonial, push into the area, and it was all mostly Native Americans still. And they lived alongside him and got along with him, and it was like, oh, here's one weird family from, somewhere down in Philadelphia, and they seem cool, whatever. And they all got along, but Tom was about 5 years old when this happened, and he got really friendly with the tribal Lenape that were up there, and he spent more time with them growing up and knew the language, knew everything, about them. He was just...
This was Milford area?
In between Water Gap and Milford, like Shawnee up to Milford, probably that whole stretch of the river. And inland on both sides, I'm sure, but that was the stomping ground, I think. But, so from the time he was 5, he grew up, and there was an Indian kid his age that he grew up with, and they were good friends. His name was Musquink. I might be saying that wrong. But anyway, as I read it, his name was Musquink. And his father was the head of that local, village. And they grew up together, and Tom had spent more time running around in the woods and having fun and, playing on the river. And what happened following that, this is probably one of the uprisings, like the 1750s, was it? I forget when we were talking earlier, but in one of those 2 uprisings, it was probably the mid-1700s.
First one, the first uprising.
Okay, so it would have been the first uprising. So, more families had started to move up into the area and colonize over that next 10 years. And, well, the locals at that point, native people there were getting sick of it, and they organized an uprising. And in that uprising, the story goes that Tom was walking down the river, it was in the winter, with his uncle and his father, and Musquink ambushed them and shot Tom's father in the head, which had been his best friend for the 10 years. And that tweaked Tom, and I guess his uncle and him got away, but he swore that he was going to spend the rest of his life avenging his father's death, and at that point just turned into a serial killer. And there's a lot of stories about the different ways and the different things. The only two I remember, I told him last time, but I'll tell him again, that he's a clever guy. He would stash rifles, and then he'd stash rifles on the way into an encampment or a town, and he'd cause a ruckus and get everyone to chase him out, and then he'd stop wherever he had the rifles stashed, pull them out, drop a couple of people, keep running, they'd follow him, get to another tree, pull out a couple more, drop a couple people.
Right, because at that time you had a load of guns, so one shot, they come charge, and he fires once they
so
come run, there's a full body bam,
Right.
bam, bam.
Yeah, that's it. So, he had flintlocks, and he'd have them ready, loaded to go, so he could, drop a few shots. And the other story I remember, and if you look them up and find all the older stories and stuff that are, written in the pen of the time, there's quite a few accounts.
I got a visual of this guy, this maniac, just walking out through the woods with an armload of guns.
Yeah.
Setting free behind the street.
Now I'm doing this.
You know what I mean? Set it.
And
Bring more over here.
So all the locals, were like,
I got
yay.
balls.
Because after that first uprising, everyone was like, yay. And he became the Avenger of the Delawares, what all the settlers called him. But all the Indians in the area, native people in the area, were, this guy's Satan to them. Yeah. And he, supposedly the story goes, it could just be, some made up bullshit, but he swore he was going to kill 100 Indians before he died. That's what he wanted to do. And the other story I remember is that the kind of shit he would do, he set up a big log on the bank of the river, and he was splitting it, trying to split it in half, and he had wedges in it. And some 3 or 4 guys came by, and Indian guys. And
this one sounds like a tall tale, where they got their fingers jammed in the logs, right?
Yeah, and he's like, help me split the log apart. And they're all like pulling on it, and he knocked the wedge out and pinched their hands in the log, and then killed them. But supposedly he just rained down terror, but he ended up getting smallpox late in his life, and he knew he was going to die. And this is the one that really fucked everyone up. He took every blanket he could get his hands on, loaded them into a wagon, and wiped them all over all of his shit. And it was going into winter, and he rode through the Wyoming Valley and dropped blankets everywhere covered with smallpox. And supposedly, tens of thousands of people were killed by this. So it was the first use of germ warfare, intentionally. Back then, at least it's recorded. Just more fucked up history. So anyway, throwing that out there.
So there's that.
And of course,
land of the free and the home of the brave.
And supposedly, there's still a big contingent of people trying to get the statue in Milford taken down of him.
Yeah.
The Tom Quick Monument.
Yeah. So, it's old.
They should just put their own plaques up next to it. This guy did this.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
We should go. We should do it for them.
Yeah. It's not a bad idea.
Yeah.
Anyway, there's
guerrilla history. That's your service.
Mm-hmm.
There's a tidbit of that.
Like that.
There were 2 things that made that real for me. The idea of native people actually living where we were occupying land, Mercer County, north of Trenton. I had a neighbor. He was kind of a scary guy. I was like 12, and he was like in his 80s probably. But he was born the year after the Civil War ended.
Amazing.
So he was born in 1866. And he had about a 2-acre garden in back of his house. So he had the walking plow, and probably in the 1940s, 1950s, probably he exhausted it. But what he would find every time in the spring he'd be plowing, he'd turn up either stones that were used for grinding corn or nuts, and he would arrowheads all over the place, spear points. And I remember he brought us in, my sister and I, my brother, and he had this big piece of wood on the wall, and he had all these spear points and grinding stones mounted on the wall.
Neat.
Yeah, it was just, and then our neighbor, about a quarter mile up the road, we used to go over there and play a lot. They had a stone about 3/4 the size of this table, and it was about that thick, about 2.5 feet thick.
Can I interject
one
quick
the whole
thing?
Inside of it was worn down about.
Pestles.
This is
So it was a grinding stone.
It was a big one too, but I'm just going to interject one thing.
Sure.
Just for the location on this. This is right where you leave New Jersey on the 95 bridge to go to Pennsylvania. Right there is where this entire farm and
Well, there's a couple streams
neighborhood.
there were tributaries to the
creeks.
Delaware.
Yeah.
So they had encampments there, obviously.
You know, there's supposedly one was there a trading post right where what is the creek there that goes to the preserve? That's the Tunkhannock or Togahannock Creek, where that feeds into the Lehigh.
what you mean.
I've read about this trading post a few times. When you look it on Google Earth, you're like, that's where I'd build a trading post. Like I always wanted to go up there and look around.
It'd be a good place for a metal detector if it's legal.
Probably. I don't know where exactly it is, and I talked to one of the Lenape guys on Facebook because I'm a part of that one of their groups, and he didn't seem to know anything about it, but I've read about it. It's on those maps that you see in a preserve. You know, they can just up in the Pocono Lake Preserve, we do masonry there, and you'll see a lot of these old maps, and they talk about I forget what they called it, the trail that went from Hazleton to Milford through the Great Swamp, because that big swamp there they talk about. The Indians knew about it. You can read about this.
Probably a lot of shit deep down, yeah.
Where that village would have been, I'm sure there would have been. It just makes sense, like where the location is, right where they're talking about. That trail would have came down, the rivers there would have been a confluence of like.
I've got
a movement, you know.
I've got a fun story. It's a culmination of 3 different stories.
We're bounce out in about 5 minutes.
The last one, and then I'll just say one quick thing too after that. But I could probably do this in 5 minutes. But right around the same time, around the time the Anasazi thing fell apart in the Southwest, is around the same time. And there's this book, it's in the Belvedere Library, and I read through it, and I should have just taken pictures of every page. It's like a 200-page book from about 1870, 1880, and it's a history of the Lenape Indians. And in it, it's got a chapter that talks about their origins. And their origin story that I read in there, if it's, to be believed, is they came from a land far to the west beyond the Great River, which is the same time the Anasazi culture collapsed. But their story is that they came from that area, they crossed the Great River, and interesting, but so it went in this book, they met a bunch of giants through like Ohio and that area, and they asked for passage, and this is where all the mounds and the you've heard about the mounds and the giants that are buried there, and they're all connected to the copper culture up in
Wisconsin.
Wisconsin.
Mackinac,
the Mackinac mine on Isle Royale. And there's a whole thing about that where guys he did satellite images and found they started about 7,000 years ago because you could see the tailings going out into the lake. They imaged them. So 7,000 years ago they were pulling copper out up there. But as this group of people came across, they crossed the river, they encountered these giants, they negotiated with them. Giants, they were big people, they were like 7 footers,
right.
8 footers, whatever. And they said, okay, you can cross, whatever. And then it was such an exodus that they freaked out. The giants that were the culture that was in that whole area, east of the Mississippi. And a battle broke out, or a war broke out between them. And the numbers were so great of the people that were leaving the Southwest because there was a drought hitting that area, and they were heading for the East Coast. And this is in the Lenape history.
This is interesting.
They drove them all the way down the Mississippi Valley and conquered them. and then continued back to the East Coast and mixed in with everything that was sitting on the East Coast. So that was an interesting tidbit of a story. And
almost it makes sense of what happened to them people, because all of a sudden they don't know where they went.
Well, they disappeared, but they're supposedly,
that makes
according
sense. Showed up and
to
chased them
Lenape
away.
history that was recorded in this book the book's 1880 or so, and it's an extensive history. They just sat down with every Lenape.
They talked about crossing the great spine of the universe, right?
Yeah.
In this, isn't their creation story? They crossed the Rocky Mountains first before the Great River, unless that was Iroquois. But I've read about
that could be migrations. Too. But I mean, there was a massive drought that hit the Southwest. That whole area turned to savanna from being, it was canal systems all over the Southwest. Amazing. The Pima Indians and the Hohokam. And the Hohokam is really a Pima word that means many people all gone. You make the first syllable, you say it twice, and that makes it plural, and Hoka means people all gone. Hohoka means many people all gone. But they've, also the Anasazi, everyone left in exodus, because it dried up in the Southwest, supposedly to the East Coast. And in the story in the book from them in the 1880s is that, they crossed, they had a big battle with all these dudes in the Ohio Valley and wherever, I don't know if there's even Ohio into Pennsylvania and down the Mississippi. And then they eventually ended up back here. And supposedly that's the Cherokee are down south there too. I don't know. Mm-hmm. Anyway, they all ended up back here. So I'm going to go find that book. It's been 25 years since I've seen that book, but I sat there in the library and read it like twice. The only other thing I have to say is if anyone from Turtle Island here before, pre-Columbian people, if anything's been offensive and anything we've been talking about here, we apologize, but I have nothing but respect and reverence.
Thank you.
Exactly, yeah.
Thank
So,
you. Well
Amen.
said.
Yeah. And
Well, I gotta go. I don't know how long you guys are gonna stay, but Albert,
Yeah, we're about good. Thank you, Tom.
Kim, nice meeting you. Sean,
you guys going
Tom,
over there
good to
to
see
see
you.
the music?
Mary.
Mary.
Thank you.
You going over to Musicville?
Hey everybody, whoever's listening.
See you Friday.
It's been real. Thanks.
Yeah.
See you Friday.
Powwow. Yeah, Tom Isaac Powwow. Froggy Day is May 13th.
You got it. And then
Keystone
what's
Stage.
after that? Key Stage May 20th.
Yep, Beaver Run, June 5th. Where the walls are, yeah. It's gonna be
The walls come tumbling up. Yeah, that's gonna be
they're gonna
Don't play too loud.
Yeah.
We gotta
Hey, have a good night, everybody.
That's what you have to
Take
do.
care.
Take care, Tom.
Well, there goes another one, folks. What a fun episode of the Planet Shivers podcast to not only record, but to listen back to. I appreciate all these people who came on the show. They're awesome and some of my closest friends. So thank you. Sean, Don, Tom, Isaac, Mary, Emily, and Kim for hanging out and being on the show. Like I said in the beginning, I love these roundtables. They're pretty great. If you want to hear more of the Planet Shivers podcast, you can find it on all major podcast platforms and YouTube. And you can see more of what I'm up to on Instagram at Albert Shivers and www.albertshivers.com. Also, while you're on Instagram, look up the band Powwow, Pain of Wisdom in a World of Waste. They got a lot of great shows coming up, and you don't want to miss them. Farmcore, come on. I will talk to you guys on the next episode. Episode 100 is the next episode. Until then, take care of yourself and take care of somebody else.